Hello hockey fans and welcome back to another video. If I was to ask you to name the longest suspension in NHL history, I imagine that each of you watching this would likely present one of several different answers. Some of you might recall Chris Simon's 30-game suspension back in December of 2007 for stepping on Jarkko Ruutu's foot. Some of you will mention Dennis Weidman's 20-game suspension in January of 2016 for cross-checking a referee, while most of you would probably answer with Raffi Torres' 41-game suspension for his hit on Jakob Silfverberg during a pre-season game in October of 2015. However, did you know that one player was suspended for far longer than any of these three guys? In fact, this player's actions were deemed so disgraceful that he received a permanent suspension from the NHL. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Billy Coutu, a Canadian defenceman who was handed a lifetime ban from the National Hockey League all the way back in 1927. Now granted, Coutu's suspension took place nearly 100 years ago now, and he wasn't exactly an NHL superstar during his career, so I'll forgive you for being completely unaware of his existence. I mean, I didn't know about him until I started researching this video, but as it stands right now at the time of this recording, Billy Coutu is the only player in the history of the NHL to receive a lifetime ban from the league. Now, given that the NHL is currently 105 years old at this point, and given that the league has housed some questionable players over its century-long existence, I'm not sure whether that achievement is impressive or alarming. Maybe it's both? I don't know, why don't you guys tell me in the comments? But why was Coutu given a lifetime ban from the NHL? What could he possibly have done to receive a permanent suspension from the league? Well, let's take a look at what went down and try to figure it out, shall we? This is the story of Billy Coutu, the NHL player that was banned for life. Now, in order to understand why he was suspended for life, let us begin with a brief overview of Coutu's NHL career in order to understand the type of player he was and what led to his infamous ban. Born in North Bay, Ontario on March 1st, 1892, Wilfred Arthur Billy Coutu would begin his pro hockey career at the age of 24, as he joined the NHA's Montreal Canadiens for the 1916-17 season. Though he would go scoreless in 24 games and racked up 17 penalty minutes during his debut year with the team, the defenceman would stick around for quite some time, as he remained with the Habs when they joined the National Hockey League in 1917 and spent almost the entirety of the next decade as a member of the Canadiens organisation. Now, Coutu may have joined the NHL during its inception, but he was far from being a productive player in the league. Instead, the defenceman became equally known for his physical style and no-nonsense play as he was for his emotional outbursts and red-hot temper. In fact, Coutu's actions were so questionable that he received multiple punishments during his career, including a $200 fine and a suspension for a late-game brawl during the 1923 playoffs, a 10-minute misconduct and a $100 fine for elbowing in 1925, a 10-minute hooking penalty for wrapping his stick around an opponent's neck in 1926, as well as another $100 fine for intentionally tripping a referee later that same game. For context, $100 in 1925 is worth approximately $1,600 today, so Coutu racked up roughly $8,000 worth of fines over a 3-year span. Talk about paying for your actions, eh, folks? Despite his long history of questionable plays, Coutu would carve out quite the lengthy NHL career. In fact, the defenceman would end up spending 10 seasons in the show, 8 of which with the Montreal Canadiens, where he scored 33 goals and 54 points during that span. Not only that, Coutu would become such an effective enforcer that he would register more than 30 penalty minutes in 7 of those 10 seasons, and finish his career with 478 penalty minutes in just 244 regular season games. While that might not sound like much compared to today's standards, given that an NHL season only lasted a few dozen games at the time, and given that Coutu played more than 30 contests in a single season just twice, averaging almost 2 penalty minutes a game over a decade-long career sounds pretty impressive to me, folks. Oh, and he also won the 1924 Stanley Cup as a member of the Montreal Canadiens, so Coutu certainly could have done a lot worse for himself, you know. Having scored 6 points in 32 games during the 1925-26 NHL season, and having worn the C on his jersey as the captain of the Habs roster, Coutu would be shipped off elsewhere, as he was traded to the Boston Bruins on October 22nd, 1926. Though he would join his third NHL team in just the last 7 seasons, Coutu would end up making the worst first impression in NHL history. During his first practice with the Bruins, Coutu body slammed Bruins rookie Eddie Shore so hard that his forehead hit his teammate's skull and severed Shore's ear. After visiting several medical professionals, and after being told time and time again that he should have the ear amputated, Shore finally found a doctor who agreed to sew his ear back on, though the rookie supposedly refused to take any anaesthetic during the procedure. Damn, these 1920s hockey players sure weren't messing around, eh, folks? Oh, and by the way, we're still discussing Coutu's NHL career pre-suspension. The guy almost ripped Eddie Shore's ear off, and he still hadn't committed an act terrible enough to deserve a lifetime ban from the league. I mean, if that doesn't show you just how far the NHL has progressed over the last 100 years of play, I don't know what does, folks. Despite his terrible introduction to the Bruins, Coutu would end up spending the entirety of the 26-27 season with the team, where he potted just 2 points and racked up 35 penalty minutes in 40 regular season games. However, thanks to his controversial actions in the weeks that followed, Coutu's debut year with Boston would also be his last. So now that we know what happened to Coutu pre-suspension, why was he given a lifetime ban from the NHL? Why was he the first and only player in league history to be kicked out of the NHL for good? Well, having posted a 21-20-3 record during the 26-27 NHL season, and having finished second place in the American Division, the Boston Bruins would punch their ticket to the playoffs. And thanks to their respective victories against the Chicago Blackhawks and the New York Rangers, the Bruins would advance to the finals, where they would face the Ottawa Senators for the 1927 Stanley Cup. Following a scoreless tie in Game 1 and a 3-1 Ottawa win in Game 2, Boston would be unable to level the series during Game 3, as the match ended in a 1-1 tie after double overtime. As you might expect, Coutu had played a similar role during this postseason run as he had done for the rest of his NHL career, as he potted just a single goal and racked up 4 penalty minutes in 7 postseason games. However, the following contest would change Coutu's career forever. On April 13th, 1927, the Bruins and the Senators took to the ice for Game 4 of the Stanley Cup Finals. Though 2 of their last 3 contests had ended in a tie, Ottawa would clinch both the game and the championship, as the home side defeated Boston by a score of 3-1 to clinch the 1927 Stanley Cup Championship. Now, while most players are gracious in their defeat and they congratulate the winning side for a hard-fought series, Billy Coutu wasn't one of those players. As the championship game concluded and Ottawa took the victory, Coutu began antagonising his opponent shortly after the final buzzer sounded, which resulted in a bench-clearing brawl between the two teams. Interestingly, it is rumoured that Coutu started this brawl since he had been ordered to by Bruins head coach Art Ross, though it's unclear as to whether this claim is actually true. Now, while Coutu's on-ice actions had certainly been controversial that night, his behaviour after the game would be much, much worse. As the officials left the ice and headed towards their locker room, Coutu ran after referee Jerry Laflamme and assaulted him in the officials-only section of the hallway. If that wasn't bad enough though, when fellow referee Billy Bell tried to intervene, Coutu supposedly tackled him and began assaulting him as well. Once tempers finally died down and news of the incident had reached the league, NHL president Frank Calder immediately got to work finding a suitable punishment for Coutu's actions. Sure, Game 4 of that series included plenty of questionable plays from either side, but Coutu's decision to hunt down the refs and physically assault them after they had already left the ice was everything Calder needed to punish Coutu and punish him severely. Shortly after the incident took place, the NHL released a statement which read, "For striking referees Bell and Dr. Laflamme, player Coutu is expelled from the National Hockey League and is fined $100. And just like that, Billy Coutu had been banned from the NHL for life. Immediately after the statement was released, Bruins president Charles Adams tried to fight the decision, as he began to kick up a fuss over Calder's statement and suggested that Coutu ask for a hearing. However, during a league meeting the following month, team governors voted to uphold Coutu's ban, and neither the Bruins nor the player himself would attempt to fight this verdict in the weeks and months that followed. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I completely agree with the NHL's decision to give Coutu a lifetime ban. Sure, Game 4 of the 1927 finals sounded like a pretty nasty affair for everybody involved, and a number of players were equally as deserving of punishments due to their actions that night, but hunting down a referee after the game was over and physically assaulting him is simply inexcusable. I don't care how upset Coutu was with the final result, or how frustrated he was with the officiating staff that night. That doesn't give you the right to physically harm a league employee, especially when they've already left the ice after the game was over. Now, some of you may argue that a lifetime ban is a pretty excessive punishment for what Coutu did, and I can certainly see where you're coming from, but if the NHL wants to ensure the safety of their referees, deter any other players from taking liberties with their contracted employees, and make sure that these actions never happen again, then they had to throw the book at Coutu and punish him severely. After all, if the players believed that they could get away with this kind of behaviour, and they received little to no consequences when they did so, then the NHL would have become even more lawless than it already was at the time, and would have flown off the rails very quickly, especially during the league's infancy in the late 1920s. But anyway, having just been handed the first lifetime ban in league history, and having seen his NHL career come to an unexpected end, Coutu would take his talents elsewhere, as he joined the Canadian American Hockey League for the 1927-28 season. Though he would spend the next 2 seasons in the CAHL and score 13 points and 150 penalty minutes in just 77 games during that span, Coutu didn't seem to feel that bad about what he had done in April of 1927, as it was said that the defenceman was, quote, bitter and without remorse. In fact, Coutu had such little regret for his actions that he was suspended for the remainder of the 28-29 CAHL season due to hitting an opponent in his face with his stick, though this suspension would be lifted a day later and Coutu would be handed a $200 fine instead. I don't think he'd learnt his lesson, do you, folks? However, less than 2 years after his NHL suspension was given, a surprise announcement was made. On October 8, 1929, NHL President Frank Calder revealed that Coutu was free to sign with an NHL team again, as his lifetime suspension had been lifted by the league. I'm not sure Calder understood what lifetime ban means, but maybe that's just me. Unfortunately for Coutu though, this comeback wasn't meant to be. Though his suspension had been lifted and he was free to rejoin the show, Coutu was only allowed to return to the NHL provided his current team, the American Hockey Association's Minneapolis Millers, released him from his existing deal with their organisation. Now, whether Minneapolis refused to release him from his contract or Coutu received little to no interest from every NHL team in the league is unclear, but as a result, Coutu never returned to the NHL for the rest of his career. Not exactly a happy ending for him, but given that he hadn't played in the show for nearly 2 years at that point due to his lifetime suspension, and given that he was 37 years old at the time of his reinstatement, his best days were clearly far behind him. And that's not even mentioning his limited point production and his sizable amount of penalty minutes too. I mean, I probably wouldn't have signed him either, would you? Having failed to return to the NHL, the aging defenceman would spend the next 2 years with the Minneapolis Millers, score 11 points and register 151 penalty minutes in just 80 games during that span, before retiring from the sport altogether at the conclusion of the 1930-31 season at the ripe old age of 40. Though his playing career had come to an end and he never returned to the NHL, Coutu would be brought up by the league one last time. Shortly after Coutu's retirement, in March of 1932, Montreal Canadiens owner Leo Danderond convinced the league's governors to rescind Coutu's lifetime ban. Now, given that Frank Calder had already reinstated Coutu 3 years prior, it's unclear as to whether the 1932 ruling was anything more than a formality, since it didn't appear to hold a different meaning than the previous decision. But regardless, I figured that it was worth mentioning anyway, you know. Having called it a day on his career and having been officially exonerated by the NHL, Coutu would begin a career in coaching shortly after his retirement, as he was named head coach of the CAHL's Providence Reds for the 1932-33 season. Though he would coach the Reds for the next 3 years, and he would briefly come out of retirement for a single game with the team, Coutu would be reprimanded once again, as he was ejected from a game on March 24th, 1935 for abusing referee Jack Cameron. Coutu really didn't like the on-ice officials, did he, folks? After leaving the Providence Reds at the conclusion of the 1934-35 season, Coutu would spend several years away from the game before returning to coach the New Haven Eagles during the 37-38 season, the first team he played for after being banned from the NHL. After a lone year behind the Eagles bench, Coutu would depart from both the team and from the game of hockey altogether, as he never worked within the sport ever again, at least at the professional level anyway. After several decades away from the sport, Coutu would eventually pass away on February 25th, 1977, at the age of 84. Though he produced modest scoring numbers throughout his pro career and his tenure in the show has been lost to the history books, Billy Coutu holds the exclusive honour of being the only player in NHL history to receive a lifetime ban from the league. Sure, the suspension was lifted only 2 years later, and the ban was rescinded only half a decade after the incident, but given that he never returned to the NHL for the rest of his career, this lifetime ban did last the rest of his life, exonerated or not. So remember kids, if you're angry at the referees and you want to take your revenge, make sure you do it on the ice and not in the corridor after the game. After all, it's better to take a minor penalty and a small fine than be banned for life, right? Don't actually do that, by the way, I was completely joking. Leave the referees alone, alright? Their job is bad enough as it is, okay? And on that note, I'm going to end today's video. That was a look at the NHL player who was banned for life. What do you guys think about Billy Coutu's career or his lifetime suspension from the NHL? Do you think that he should have stayed banned for the rest of his career, or should he never have been punished so severely in the first place? Let me know in the comments below, I would love to hear what you guys think. But thank you very much for watching guys, I hope you have enjoyed. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, or watch some of my other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye! A big thank you to Clayton Hallam, Drew Fawcett, Houston NG, Lucas Gates, Raquel and Worthless Pieces for helping support this video via Patreon. If you too want to help support the channel a little bit further and get a shout out at the end of every future video, make sure you head over to patreon.com/oddmanrush and become a patron today.